No problem whatsoever. Sounds good.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on to celebrate the World Trade Day. And the topic for today is the global transformation in the post-pandemic world. It's my privilege to welcome you from World Trade Center Mumbai, the India's first World Trade Center. We are celebrating World Trade Day today, and it is one of the flagship event of WTC Mumbai to create awareness about international trade. World over, all WTCs, there are 315 WTCs that celebrate the World Trade Day to basically create the awareness about international trade for MSMEs, as well as to make them aware about the impact of economic development and regional growth. May I now request Mr. Vijay Kalantri, our Chairman, World Trade Center Mumbai, to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Thank you. Thank you, my learned speakers, for joining us. Mr. Siddharth Rastogi, Managing Director of MD, who is going to moderate the session. Mr. Andrew Wilson, the Global Policy Director of International Chamber of Commerce. We had once your Director General also with us at WTO forum, public forum meeting 4 years back. I think in last 2 years, of course, there is no WTO forum, so we have not participated. It's all virtual. But hope if this year they are proposing to have, if it is there, we will have one session there. So we look forward to see your participation. And Dr. Eric Bagloff, the Chief Economist, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Unfortunately, Eric couldn't make it because of his health issues. So we have a senior economist.
Yeah, Mr. Abhijit Sengupta. Sorry.
That's correct.
Okay. So, of course, economists differ from each other, but not so much. we in industry and trade differ more than that. Because I feel the economist can prepare a good paper, but implementation has to be done finally by the entrepreneur. So that is the background for us. So if you only take it that as a theory as full implementation, it becomes a problem. So economics gives you a guideline and research that this is what is we foresee and this is what can be done. Rest you have to put it in a place. You know, like you come from US also, after studying your MBA and all, the students, when they come and they try to implement that US study, it becomes a problem. But when you, like, you know, Atal Bihari Vajpayee used to say that Jugaad technology is required in India, without which it is not possible. I think Asian development, infrastructure, or whichever the organizations who deals with India, they also know that India as a system to work. But of course, we have at present, as to in a very international conference, I said once when I was in UK, that sir, you have given us a system of bureaucracy. You are trying to get away from there and you are trying to liberate yourself. We have perfected it more than you. So we have more bureaucracy than them in our India. Although we talk about reforms, but the reforms have not percolated at the operating level. Anyhow, with these few words, sorry, I just deviated from the topic. World Trade Day, we are celebrating in, as Anil said, that 315 World Trade Center in 90 countries. And we have got membership of 1 million. So that is what WTC movement all over the country. Of course, you know 9/11 and you know WTC working in various countries wherever you are working. I think even in Paris, we have a World Trade Center, which is part of the Paris Chamber of Commerce, adjoining to Paris Chamber of Commerce. I mean, it's one of the finest buildings in Paris, I think. And even the Chambers building and the architecture and the paintings which I saw there is marvelous. We had, whenever we used to have a meeting, World Trade Center regional meeting, we used to have it there. So I used to see and the garden behind, beautiful. So, and I understand that even the President and the Prime Minister of France visits those places for some parties and functions. It's one of the most historic places. The World Trade Day is flagship event of our World Trade Center Mumbai, and Rupa Nayak has been spearheading that movement, and she has been organizing every year to spread the movement not across India but across globally. And that's why she has been able to get some of the global speakers today and to see that how we can integrate with the global economy. That's the main thing. Like, pandemic and post-pandemic, I always believed, even last year I had, after the pandemic of 4 months, I said opportunities after pandemic. Because uh, if you are not getting over COVID or pandemic, whatever it is, you will not be able to survive or you will not be able to run. So you have to move forward. So if you have to move forward, you have to think what is going to be tomorrow. Realignment of our global economy. See, many countries are realigning with each other. Now, many countries are now preferring India also. Our agriculture and our horticulture, other products we have exported more than 100% more than what we were doing earlier. Fruits and vegetables, because people feel that this is the state from where the non-COVID we are getting, and what they were getting from our neighboring countries, they are getting from us. Similarly, we have to do capacity building. Like in WTO, we had a agenda, and that was the aim and object of WTO, developing and least developing country capacity building, which I think has not taken place substantially as it should have taken place. Like many of the policies which Indian government also took decisions in last year, they were 2 years earlier they were to be taken. And finally, because of pandemic, they took some decisions. Some hard decisions also they took, and some financial decisions also they took. So world over this has happened. But I feel many of the countries have also put export restriction. About 80 countries have come out with export restrictions. So this is also going to make you have a trade realignment. Because if you do not look at new avenues or new opportunities, you may not be able to survive with industry and trade. But some of the sectors have done very well, like pharma, IT, digital economy, textiles, engineering. So anything in concern with high tech, you have done well. So we feel that global chain, everybody is trying to improve his system. Pandemic has given you new thought for food also, because you think that what you were traditionally doing, now you think that we have to move from our own tradition to some deviation also. Of course, the MSME has been a big sufferer in pandemic, and their main problem is, of course, has been a prolonged problem, timely and inadequate finance, poor infrastructure, and single entrepreneur working, rules, regulations. So this all comes out with the, but what I feel is that we have to think what best can be done for future of industry and trade. And once the industry and trade prospers, economy prospers. Economy prospers, people prosper. It's a chain. The unemployment has gone up. So we have to see how we bring back that employment. Of course, today IMF has again revised the forecast 9.5% for India, which was earlier 11%. So 1.5 they have reduced. But next year they are saying it will be 9%, 22. And this year it will be 9.5. So we feel that productivity is one part. Employment for all is more important part. Because once we do not have employment, we will have more crime, more law and order problem. So these are all pandemic. And of course, this virus is a man-made virus. It's not a virus in the air, or it's not a virus which has come. And we are talking about various viruses. Now, our Prime Minister said very nicely that day, when somebody was saying Delta virus, this virus, he said, why are you predicting virus like a forecast of weather? Don't forecast it like a weather. Let it happen, what happens, let's see. Let's prepare ourselves. I'm not saying we should not prepare. We should prepare ourselves. But let us not forecast and depress people. Because I think many people have not died because of COVID. They have died because of comorbidity, or they have died because of various disease. And many people have died because of depression and shock. Oh, I got COVID, I'm going to die. I don't know. All these are practical because I talk to people and talk to doctors, talk to other industrial friends. I said, let's come out. Now, in Mumbai also, Mumbai being commercial and economic capital of India, we are still not open. We work only up to 4 o'clock. We have restrictions. When the cases are hardly 254 in 3 crore population of Mumbai. And in India, 138 crore population, people were talking about 135. We got 30,000 cases, 28,000, 30,000 cases. Whereas in US, it is 60,000 cases, which is hardly one-third population of India. So we have to see that we are able to manage things also well. And if we are able to vaccinate people 2 jabs before end of the year, I think that will be a miracle. And that will help us to move forward. So with these few words, I would not like to take more time. I would like to hear learned speakers and Mr. Andrew, Mr. Sen Gupta and Mr. Rastogi. And then let's see how it goes. And wish you all the best. And thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you very much, Kalantri sir. As he has rightly pointed out, the pandemic has brought about a great deal of transformation and realignment of the trade scenario worldwide, and the opportunities that are coming out of these transformations. So we have an excellent panel today, led by dynamic Mr. Siddharth Rastogi, and kindly allow me to introduce him. Mr. Rastogi is the expert in behavioral finance and capital markets. He's also the managing director of Ambit Investment. He's with Ambit for more than 20 years, and before joining Ambit, he co-founded IIFL Private Wealth, and also set up the mutual fund and structured product distribution business for IIFL. So kindly allow me to welcome Mr. Siddharth Rastogi. Sir, will you please take the discussion forward?
So thank you, Anil. Thank you, Rupa. Thank you, World Trade Center. Thank you, Mr. Kalantri. Welcome our esteemed guests, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Sen Gupta. We will talk about them. They are the guest speakers today, and we will take a lot of wisdom, lot of knowledge, lot of gyan from them today. Because as Mr. Kalantri rightly said, both Mr. Wilson and Mr. Sen Gupta can act as your coach, as your mentor, as your guru. While the implementation has to be done by you, but they can give you the direction, they can give you the knowledge, they can give you the forecast, what, how, and why will it happen. So we'll talk about it. But before we start this interesting conversation of transformation post-COVID, let's hear a short story. Story goes back July 1914, nearly 105 years back, a century and 5 years back. The Emperor and Empress of Austro-Hungarian Empire, one of the largest European empires, were going to Sarajevo to give a town hall speech. They were in an open car in a cavalcade with 5-7 cars in front, 5-7 cars behind. A Serbian hurls a bomb onto the car. As the luck would have it, the bomb falls inside the car, jumps over to the next car, and blasts at the third car. 2 people die, 9 people injured. Both the emperor and the empress remain safe, but there was a lot of chaos. The emperor, Archduke Ferdinand, decides to go ahead with the town hall speech. He goes to Sarajevo, he gives the speech. And after that, there was another speech which was to be delivered at the city hall in Sarajevo. They tend to cancel that. They said that we will go back to the hospital in the main city to check how the injured and the wounded are doing. Lot of chaos. They instructed their driver to head towards the hospital. In a lot of confusion, in a lot of utter chaos, the driver didn't hear. He took a turn, a wrong turn, which was a dead end. The turn which he was supposed to take for the hospital was the next turn. He took a turn before that. He moves ahead. People are in front of the cavalcade. The cavalcade stops because of a lot of people. A Serbian with a gun shoots 5 bullets straight in the head of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. The emperor and the empress dies immediately. Austro-Hungarian Empire retaliates in extreme anger on Serbia. Russia, which was an ally of Serbia, retaliates back. Germany, which was an ally of Austro-Hungarian Empire, retaliates back. The next is the emergence of First World War in 1914. In next 4 years, it will kill 2 crore or 20 million people. It will kill 20 million people, and it will wound and injure 2.1 crore or 21 million people. This is known as butterfly impact. Small action, big impact. One wrong turn can lead to catastrophe. And there are umpteen number of examples which have similar positive impact as well. Why am I talking about this? The reason I'm talking about this is the First World War ended in 1918, and something immediately happened after the First World War. The greatest ever pandemic in human history. Today, the world population is 760 crore, 7.6 billion people. Back in 1918, the world population was 1.7 billion people. The world witnessed the most disastrous Spanish flu, which impacted nearly 50 crore, one third of the world population, or 500 million people. As per CDC estimates, nearly 2 crore or 20 million people were dead. 1918 and 1919 in a span of 24 months. If you compare it with today's pandemic, the numbers are nearly very, very small. So it's closer to only 4 crore, 4.5 crores, which means 40 to 50 million people who have been infected, and 4 to 4.5 million deaths, official, unofficial, everything put together. Very small number, but yet massive impact. And what happened after 1918 and 1919 is interesting to know. The US economy after 1920, 1922, 1923 grew in double digits. So 1923, the US economy grew at 13% real GDP growth. Immediately after the pandemic, and the pandemic was similar: masks, social distancing, confinement to houses, no external movement. 100 years back. And after that, hyper growth, hyper consumption, hyper leverage, instant gratification, and short-sighted approach, which translates, all of it is wicked, all of it is bad, all of it is sin, but it all translates into good business. Very, very good business. And then we all know what happened. The stock markets also rose from 1919 till about 1929, and then we had a Great Depression, which lasted for nearly 35 years. We are still far away. Stock markets are booming. Stock markets are booming like nobody's business. US, global, Iran, US market, UK market, every stock market globally is doing exceedingly well. We are still far from being bust. And there is huge opportunity. So that's the prelude I wanted to put, because history does not repeat in its own avatar, but history tells us what will happen next. So three things: instant gratification, hyper demand, hyper credit growth, short-sighted approach. You want to do it now. If you don't have the money to do it now, you don't have the money to spend it now, borrow and then. And what will fuel all this is music to the ears, near negative to zero interest rates across West. Ignored inflation because most people believe that the inflation is because of the supply side constraints. So we'll talk all this from our senior economist of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Mr. Abhijit Sengupta, and to show you the path of business opportunities, we have with us Mr. Andrew Wilson. He is the Global Policy Director. He makes all the policies to ensure how, when, and where the business opportunities lie. Because he's the man who's the director at International Chambers of Commerce. He can have the entire world's view, a 360-degree view. So let's understand from both these dignitaries today. Mr. Andrew Wilson, he's a permanent observer of International Chambers of Commerce. He has took charge of the Policy and External Affairs Department and the COVID response. Mr. Wilson has a huge background in terms of giving policy recommendations to various global organizations, and his policy recommendations, most of them get accepted. So welcome, Mr. Wilson. Thank you for taking time out with us. Our second guest is Mr. Abhijit Sengupta. He is the senior economist, a person of Indian origin. Thanks for coming back to your roots, Mr. Sengupta. Thanks for doing excellent work from India to on the international platform. Thank you so much. And he's a senior economist for Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this great platform to show the path, to give the wisdom, to give the direction and guidance to specifically most vulnerable, most underprivileged section of the business community, which is SMEs and MSMEs. Because that's the backbone of India. There are nearly 6.5 crore, nearly 60 million plus SMEs and MSMEs, which employ nearly 3 to 4 people on an average, and they are the biggest employment generators. They are the biggest guys who are ensuring that the food reaches the last mile and it goes into the stomach because of these SMEs and MSMEs. So you have to be the torch bearers, the people who can give direction. So thanks for joining us. My first question to Mr. Wilson is little personal. Tell me, Mr. Wilson, about you, about your beginning. Where did you start? You have accomplished so much in your life at such a young, tender age. What is the secret mantra? Because we are a country of 138 crore people. We need smart people and inspiration like you. Over to you, Mr. Wilson.
Well, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I hope I live up to our expectations at this session. So about me, I was born in the north of England in a small industrial town. You've never heard of it. It's in the county of Yorkshire, where Sachin Tendulkar played for one not so great season, I have to say, but it was great to have him there at the time. I remember being tremendously excited. Thanks to my wonderful, wonderful parents, I had the opportunity to be the first person in my family to go to university. From there, after various false starts in my career, I joined ICC almost 15 years ago, and I joined expecting to stay with the organization for 2 years and maybe move to a policy or public affairs role in a multinational corporate. But actually, I've found the organization to be a tremendous platform, and I've had the opportunity to work in London, in Paris now for the second time, and also heading our representation to the United Nations in New York for several years. That's on a personal note, but I just wanted to just mention something about the ICC because there's an interesting confluence with the introduction you just gave, Mr. Rastogi, in that ICC was actually founded in 1919 at the end of the First World War. And it was done by a group of industrialists, principally from Europe and the United States. But they had a vision that the only way for the world to recover and recover in a sustainable and durable fashion from the horrors of the First World War and the Spanish flu pandemic was actually for nations to cooperate, and specifically for businesses to be able to trade internationally. So we're essentially an organization that stands for global peace through international commercial exchange. And that's something that we consider to be highly, highly relevant coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. So this is very, very enlightening, because this may be the first organization which actually brought the world together, because before even UN came into the picture, before WTO came into the picture, this was largely driven in the 40s after the Second World War. I think ICC was the first organization literally to bring the world together. And what we say in Sanskrit, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, the world is our family. And that was the ethos with which International Chamber of Commerce emerged. So thank you, Mr. Wilson. Jumping to our second guest, Mr. Sengupta, tell me about your journey, about your beginning. A lot of people are looking forward to hearing your personal story. So where were you born? A little bit about your background, and you are an accomplished face of India on the World Forum. So we want to hear about you, Mr. Sengupta.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Rastogi. I mean, for this very, 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 very nice words, and I also hope that I live up to this. First of all, I would start by apologizing on behalf of Eric, who couldn't make it because of health issues, and he hopes that he gets a chance to interact with you all very soon. Coming to me, for the first 25 to 27 years of my life, I had lived in Delhi. I did all my studying in Delhi. I went to Delhi University, I went to JNU, and then I went out for my PhD. And just after finishing for my graduate studies, I came back to India and joined a think tank. So I worked there for a few years and then joined academia. And this is where I think what Kalantri sir said was absolutely right, that economists, they design. And so it's important for them to understand the implementation and the practical knowledge. So I thought I would make this jump. And I shifted to the implementation side and joined another multilateral development bank, the Asian Development Bank, for a few years. So there it was a great opportunity to learn about the various aspects of project implementation, infrastructure project implementation. And then for the past 2 years, I have been with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We are a small economics team over there, led by Dr. Eric Bergloff. The idea is that we get involved in the entire project cycle, because we absolutely understand that it's important for us also to understand how a project is implemented, so that we bridge this gap between theory and design. So right from the design of the project to the implementation, and once the project is over, we do like some kind of an impact assessment, how successful the project was in meeting its goal. That's the basic background. It's been quite an exciting journey. We have diversified as AIIB was set up in 2015, so it was the newest MDB in the block. The original idea was to be purely an infrastructure investment bank, but when we saw what was happening to the global economy, the countries, our member countries, in view of the pandemic, we quickly became more flexible to their needs, and we have diversified significantly outside the infrastructure. And maybe I can talk a little bit about that more in the Q&A session.
Sure. So thank you for this sharing this wonderful journey, Mr. Sengupta. Next question is to Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson, you have worked in the COVID space. Now, tell us before we jump onto the solutions, the opportunities, etc. Tell us your perspective, how the COVID has actually impacted world over in terms of SMEs and MSMEs and relatively modest sized businesses, because we all understand that the Morgan Stanleys of the world, the JP Morgans of the world, the Goldman Sachs of the world, they have reported their highest ever profits, quarterly profits, when the COVID was at its peak, April, May, June of 2020, highest ever profit. So I'm not even interested in talking about the big boys because they are making moolah like nobody's business. I'm interested in understanding, what do you see about the world of business, specifically from an eye of a small entrepreneur, from a medium-sized entrepreneur. Mr. Wilson.
Sure thing. That's a great question. And certainly that's also the perspective we've brought to our work on COVID-19, to actually look at this through the lens of local small businesses and really to understand some of the stresses and strains they've been enduring through the crisis. I think what we can say is roughly as follows. And clearly, I think one lesson from this crisis, similar, I would say, to the global financial crisis, is that at an international level and even at a regional level, whether it's in advanced markets or emerging markets, we don't have very good visibility on actually what is happening in terms of the performance of the real economy and also the risks within it. And there was a very good report, I think, towards the back end of last year from the European Financial Stability Board, which said one of the big learnings supposedly from the global financial crisis was that we needed much more visibility in real time in terms of risks, particularly within the financial system. 10 plus years on, we still have no greater visibility than what we do now. But there are some data sets that we can pull from our network to really give an indication of what is happening. So what we see writ large, both in advanced and emerging economies, is SMEs clearly have severely weakened balance sheets. So in some economies, we're seeing heavy accumulation of debt, not just from businesses taking on stimulus loans from governments, but actually unpaid invoices trending at 3, 4, even 5 times pre-pandemic levels. So clearly there's an issue in terms of the balance sheet position of many SMEs coming out of the crisis. Second thing we've seen from survey data that we've conducted in a number of economies, most recently in Indonesia, is SMEs tend to be relatively pessimistic about the outlook for their business, specifically their survival chances, if there isn't a significant increase in demand and if there isn't action taken to address some of the supply side constraints caused by the crisis. Last year, when we ran those surveys, typically 50% of small businesses were saying that they expected to go out of business within 6 to 8 months, absent of a significant increase in demand. Now, businesses are generally a little bit more optimistic, but still we're seeing roughly 30 to 40% of businesses saying that they're relatively pessimistic about the future unless there's a return to pre-pandemic conditions, both on the supply side and the demand side. So that's clearly a concern. The other thing we see very, very clearly from data we have on the performance of trade finance assets, so things like export loans, letters of credit, is actually the world seemed to be entering a downturn prior to the pandemic. So this is data we haven't published yet. We'll be publishing it in September with a full analysis. But there seem to be signs, certainly in the trade finance market, of an increase in SME defaults prior to the pandemic hitting, which is quite illuminating. And again, that is consistent between both advanced and emerging economies. But what is really interesting when you look at the performance of trade assets through the crisis, there's almost a sort of a black and white split between countries that have applied high amounts of stimulus and those where stimulus has been weak or withdrawn prematurely, often because of the fiscal position of emerging market sovereigns. And essentially where you see stimulus applied at scale, very, very low rate of defaults, then maybe that is a situation that will take some time to work through. Where we're seeing a high rate of defaults in countries where stimulus has been non-existent or incredibly weak. So Mexico, for instance, has been particularly affected. Elsewhere in LATAM as well, Colombia withdrew stimulus, and within 3 to 4 months, we saw a spike from data sets that we can access through our network in SME failure. So clearly, the government intervention in the market has been a determining factor. Clearly, in terms of the outlook, there's a need for SMEs to see the global economy repaired to some semblance of normality. From our perspective, it's certainly positive that we're seeing businesses or SME owners being a little bit more optimistic on the outlook for the future. There's certainly a lot of downside risks ahead, and certainly something that policymakers can't be too complacent about from our perspective.
Sure. So a couple of key takeaways what Mr. Wilson just now said. One is there's always been a challenge with the data collection, and that's been the reality not only for India but for the global world perspective. SMEs have seen severely damaged balance sheets. The trade finance, as per Mr. Wilson, has actually jumped. This has given so pre-pandemic, after that the world is actually coming together to increase the trade finance, and wherever the stimulus has been withdrawn, the SMEs have come back under pressure. But one thing which stands out amongst all these things which Mr. Wilson spoke about is general outlook towards the world, which he said SMEs are pessimistic. Now, this is something which as an individual, and since a lot of SMEs are listening to this conversation, one thing, remember that world will always be a better place than it is before. So unless you have this firm outlook, you should not be in the business, because entrepreneurs have to be optimistic. You can never allow a person to be pessimistic if you are in business. You can't defeat a person who refuses to fail, and that's the single mindset with which you have to head. And this is a very, very pertinent and strong point which Mr. Wilson, and he's not a small man because he has oversight of maybe 80 to 100 countries, and that's very, very important for Indian SMEs and MSMEs. If they have to see through, problems will come, problems are invariably there, problems are going to be there in the system. You have to navigate your way through. So thanks Mr. Wilson. I will come back with more follow-on questions. My next question is to Mr. Sen Gupta, and this is specifically to do with interest rates. Since you are an economist, I will jump onto your area. We have seen significant reduction in interest rates, not only now, but even in the pre-COVID era, we saw benign interest rates. But during the COVID era, we have seen almost negligible and negative interest rates, right? Are these interest rates being actually translated into the real low lending rates to the SMEs and MSMEs? What you can see in India, if you have any experience, or otherwise from the global and Asia perspective. Mr. Sen Gupta.
Thank you, Mr. Rastogi. Yes, globally, I think we are at a historically low level of interest rates with negative real interest rates in a number of countries. But from an MSME perspective, unfortunately, the low interest rates does not always translate into cheap access to funds, because there are several other factors that affects the transmission channel. So just to give you an example, for example, in Bangladesh, a neighboring country which has been doing relatively well, the government capped the lending and the deposit rates at 6 to 9%, with the hope that this would be then translate into lower interest rates to the MSME. But what that did, unfortunately, was it actually dried up credit to the MSME sector, because the banking sector basically points out that, look, the supervision cost, the cost of the due diligence is just not enough with a 9% loan. So even MSMEs which were willing to borrow at, let's say, rates higher than 9% have not been successful in doing so. So given that there are a lot of other rigidities in the transmission channel, especially in emerging economies like the ones in South Asia, the policy rate cuts have not always translated into cheap access of funds for the MSMEs.
So my follow-on question quickly to you. So Indian government in 2020, in their first major stimulus, they spoke about the credit guarantee fund, which will enable SMEs and MSMEs to borrow large chunks of money, keeping the government as the credit guarantor, because SMEs and MSMEs do not have the credibility or the rating or the infrastructure to ensure that they are able to raise. So does this kind of activity helps? That's number one. And second is, if any of the policy makers were to hear, what are two simple things you would say? Because interest rate is one simple measure which can impact your bottom line directly, right? It can, without doing anything, you can just jump your bottom line just because of the lower interest rates. Most of the large corporates are witnessing it. What should we be doing? What we should be doing beyond the credit guarantee fund? A, is it effective? B, what should we be doing? Mr. Sengupta.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the credit guarantee fund was a very important step, and it is a step in the right direction. But I think the government has to do more in terms of convincing the banking and the NBFCs to come out of their risk aversion to lend to MSMEs, especially when the economy is not doing well. So that's one thing, and to improve the interest rate transmission channel, I think the key issue that MSMEs face is the high cost of supervision and due diligence, where for the banking sector to supervise these loans, and the absence of adequate collateral. So it would be helpful if this, I mean, we have made a lot of progress on digitization in the last year and a half. We were forced to do that. So if those digitization channels can be used to ease the supervision channel, make it easier for the banking sector as well as the MSME to have adequate information to be able to disburse these loans. So I think one should be ready to now pick up these tools which have developed over the year and a half to reduce the cost of the due diligence for MSMEs.
So basically, what you are saying is that the monitoring, the evaluation cost, which translates into the higher operating cost for the lending institution, needs to be brought down so that can get translated into the cheaper funds for the SMEs and MSMEs. So thank you. So I think RBI's step on the small banking side, where they are ensuring that the smaller, newer generation banks, which are more AI driven, they have more data, they will be able to translate this. So thanks, Mr. Sengupta. My next question is to Mr. Wilson. Is what do you see are some of the challenges in terms of supply chain, which SMEs and MSMEs are facing? Let me give you a little context here. So SMEs and MSMEs are never part of the end product. They are part of the entire value chain, where they manufacture small items. And because of this trade disruption, what we saw in COVID, they have been particularly impacted. So my question is, are you seeing this changes in the global supply chain getting disrupted, and what is the solution for some of these SMEs and MSMEs who have only export oriented units? Any thoughts, any solutions which come to your mind from your international experience?
I think the answer to this question comes in several parts. So first of all, our view generally is that predictions about the imminent death of global supply chains have been highly premature. And I think it's notable that, you may recall, McKinsey did a report on the future of global supply chains right at the start of the pandemic, and predicted that the future was one of reshoring and local production. It's interesting that report no longer sits on the McKinsey website. It was conveniently pulled from public consumption, because clearly what was set out economically, but also logistically, just didn't make a lot of sense. So we're relatively optimistic about the future of global supply chains. The big downside concern we have, and we published a study on this in January of this year, which I'm afraid to say is starting to be shown to be true in terms of the costs of a prolonged pandemic on supply chain disruptions. And in each of the sectors where we pointed to risks of disruptions, delays, higher costs, fueling both inflation, but also placing a drag on growth in advanced economies, regardless of the pace of their vaccination campaigns, we're now starting to see those frictions in the US and Europe and the UK. So I think the answer to the supply chain challenge, in our view, is very much that the world needs to get a firm grip on the pandemic, which means speeding the production and distribution of vaccines on an equitable basis. But also it means taking other measures to help limit the spread of the virus, whether that's social distancing, use of new technologies such as air filtration systems. And unless we take care of the virus, there will be, I'm afraid to say, a permanent cloud over global supply chains going forward, or until such time that the pandemic is brought to an end. And I think there's no way around that. But I did want to pick up on the super interesting point raised in the last point of discussion around credit conditions and SME access to finance. And I think this is going to be a pivotal determinant coming out of the crisis. There is quite clearly a risk that credit conditions will tighten coming out of the crisis as stimulus measures fade. I think there's been some very good research on this by academics at the University of Maryland in recent months, essentially saying once you take stimulus out, the banking sector's risk appetite may ultimately wither, and then suddenly you could get a credit crunch that really could accelerate SME failures, just as the world is suddenly becoming free of the effects of the virus. I think digitization, as Mr. Semgupta said, is an absolutely pivotal part of this in terms of being able to lower the transactional costs and encourage major banks to provide finance to SMEs. But I think we have to be realistic about the extent to which digitization has genuinely happened in this space through the crisis. And I think there's a lot of people who say digitization has increased exponentially through the crisis or as a result of the crisis. And that is true in some areas. So we've seen huge growth in e-commerce, for instance. But if we actually look at core digitalization of SMEs from a trade perspective, we're still seeing very low levels of actual digital practices. So to take one measure, bills of lading issued last year were 99.9% paper-based. So only 0.1% digital, despite the effects of the pandemic. Adoption of digital identity, which has a potentially transformational role in terms of lowering KYC costs for banks, they're still very, very low. So our message to SMEs looking to come out of the crisis, bearing in mind some of the public policy constraints in this area, is really to think about how do you make yourself fit for purpose as a digital business. And from that perspective, how do you make yourself an ideal client to the bank? So getting a digital identity, although there is some cost involved, is clearly a very, very important first step. Looking at the use of digital processes is another. And then the message to governments is really there's a real need to get the policy frameworks right to enable effective SME digitalization. And right now, despite some emergency legal reforms, we don't have the ecosystems in most countries to actually enable and allow that. So that's a clear area for government reform in our view.
So very, very interesting 2 points which you made, Mr. Wilson, is one is you said that the global supply chains where people have written obituary about it is not going to be so bad. It will come back. So the idea is that for SMEs and MSMEs, wherever you see gaps, because if somebody is dead, you can very clearly move swiftly and plug in the supply. So there are disruptions, but you have to capitalize on the opportunity if somebody is not able to provide. So that's one very good measure which Mr. Wilson spoke about. The second thing, which is actually transformatory, if you just look at it, it's so simplistic and it is yet transformatory, is the digital presence. Because what will happen, as Mr. Sengupta and Mr. Wilson both spoke about, there would be credit crunch because a lot of people want credit. A lot of people want credit at reasonable cost, but there is not going to be credit. So what will be the differentiation? Your digital presence. So if you have books of accounts, which is all digital, which is all clean, which is all audited, and you have it on the fly, on the go, the banking or the institution which is evaluating you will find it easier sitting evaluating from the home, from the comfort of their home, rather than going to the bank and then evaluating with physical papers and fearing about COVID. Ultimately, the banks are flushed with funds because of the cheap interest rates. They have huge amounts of money in their disposal. They also want to lend. But the challenge is of the right quality of credit. And if you are able to provide them with the right kind of substance on the digital platform, allowing the lender to evaluate you from the comfort of his or her home, you are the guy who's going to get the cheapest credit, the quickest credit, the fastest credit. So this is really, really transformatory, which Mr. Wilson, and you, what do you have to do? Put everything, scan all your documents, put it on the fly, get the auditor to have a digital signature, put it on the on the entire thing, and put it in the onto a cloud format or in any of the places where the accessibility of those documents is easy. That's it. A simple Google Drive can do the magic. You don't have to do buy any significant cost to store these. So very, very simple, doable, which can benefit. So thank you, Mr. Wilson, for those two excellent points which you made. Thanks. Next question, Mr. Sen Gupta, is little technical. I would still go and ask, is about the geopolitical situation. How do you see? So Mr. Kalantri made a very interesting demand. It's a man-made virus, and also a lot of people believe that there are nations which are behind this virus, right? And there has been reluctance, and also some of the senior members of the US administration are also supposed to be engaged, and there are whole kinds of paraphernalia which is on the websites, right? Now, what do you think is the new geopolitical order? Because geopolitical plays a very important role in promoting the trade and commerce. We all know that, right? If you have a most favored nation status, if you have global bonding between the state heads, clearly the trade also develops, right? So what's the sense of the new economic order? If you can throw some light in detail, because that will also tell our viewers what's the next nation where they can tap their next, what should be their next market be? So please, Mr. Sen Gupta.
Right. No, thank you. That is a very important question, especially with respect to how the global supply chains would evolve. So if I can just talk it in a slightly roundabout manner, I mean, this is again taking into the perspective of what we think as the global supply chain effect is going to be. So here I agree completely with Mr. Wilson that, for example, the COVID-19, what we witnessed over the last year and a half was a major stress test on the global value chains. And the initial impact we saw was dire, with the effects of work stoppages and lockdowns, which initially happened in China, but because China being the factory of the world at that point in time, it rippled across the global value chains from automobiles to electronics. So companies couldn't access their raw material across different countries. But subsequently, we do find that the global value chains held up and performed remarkably well through the pandemic, despite this initial shock. Part of this was because of China's containment of COVID-19, but so was the adoption and innovation by companies within China, but elsewhere also. And the swift and fiscal and monetary stimulus that was enacted by the policymakers also helped. But this does not mean that all is well for the global value chains. So there is still significant stresses in many parts of this production system, and this geopolitical tension is one of them. I'll just come to it. We still find there is shortages of components for a large number of products: cars, bicycles, computers, and these are being reported even in the first half of
slowly. So I want to reiterate this point, because this is music to the ears. So guys who are listening to us, cars components, bicycle components, hardware, computer hardware, all these are in short supply. So if you are any manufacturer of any of these, please go ahead and start figuring out who are your potential buyers. Get your digital presence. Sorry, I'm interrupting, because this is
absolutely
a point you said. Please go ahead.
Now, coming to this trade tension, and it's more long-term geopolitical pressure. So it's not like currently what is going on between the US-China trade tension. That has garnered more headlines. And so it seems that this will be a long-term thing. And so we might have these two poles which will act as the economic drivers of growth, requiring different kinds of technology or different kinds of regulations. But I mean, the trade tensions are not just because between these two countries. I mean, if one looks across the world, look at the global trade alert databases, the imposition of restriction measures has sharply increased over the last year and a half. The whole world is turning, in some sense, more protectionist. I mean, we even saw there was pandemic-related restrictions initially, whether it was for the personal protective equipment or for vaccines. And these are going to have long-term impact on the global recovery. So this is a critical issue that would continue, and competition for critical industrial resources would continue to add to this trade tension. The next is again something that Mr. Wilson alluded to for the global value chains: technology change. Whether we take digitization, automation, artificial intelligence, they all have started to impact the nature in which we are doing manufacturing. And global value chains would also start being impacted with there might be less emphasis on cheap labor and more demand for skills. So we already saw that there was some demand for onshoring because of automation and its potential to reduce the manufacturing cost. But this could also be taken as an opportunity, because if there are countries moving out of a particular country, whether because of the current trade tension or this was something that was happening even before because of rising labor cost, India should see, or other countries should look at what reform should be undertaken to attract those companies. I mean, Vietnam, Cambodia, they have benefited a lot out of companies moving out of China. And lastly, I would like to talk about a bit in terms of like what is happening to the climate change and its impact on global value chains. Because greenhouse gases of global trade will become a very complex issue to manage in the near future. I mean, we have seen there has been a plethora of countries and companies who have made their commitments to net zero, which is basically that there will be zero carbon footprint on a net basis at a particular point in time. But trade itself relies on a movement on components of final products across large distances with implications for climate and local environment. The production itself too has environmental impacts. So this would require support of the multinational companies, pressures from the civil society, as well as the investor community. So, I mean, while global trade tension is one part which will be impacting the global value chains, we do think that value chains, while they have recovered well from the current pandemic, will be facing several other tensions.
Understood. So the key learnings from what Mr. Sengupta said is twofold. One is, as SMEs, if you are able to position yourself as ESG or ESG compliant, remember, bigger companies eventually would want to do business with you, because their investors, their shareholders, their stakeholders would pressurize them to ensure that the entire value chain also becomes ESG compliant, not only them. So if you are able to put it on the website that you are ESG compliant and do some small baby step measures with a butterfly impact, you can really reach there. You will have an edge over other competitors, other players. Very, very small change, big impact. Thank you, Mr. Sengupta, for saying this, for stating this very, very minute but important fact. Second, which he spoke about, is earlier we used to believe that cheap labor, quantity of labor is important. Not anymore. So ensure that the labor which you have, people whom you have, you invest a lot of time and energy, because now all the resources which you can learn are available on YouTube and likes free of cost. The idea is you have to invest time and energy, not so much money, to get upskilling done, because there are a whole bunch of edu-tech companies which are giving free of cost education. You have to upskill yourself, because if you are able to upskill yourself, your staff, remember, when you send your company's resume that you have 15 people who are A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, you stand a greater chance of getting an order despite of you being an SME or MSME, rather than you saying that I have 30 member or a 50 member or a 100 member team. Be specific. If you have Mr. X, then Mr. X is CBAD certified, falana certified, because that will help you to score edge over others. So these are very important things, and it does not cost money. So if people believe that this costs money, no, you don't have to do any consultancy, take any advisory, go on the internet, do certifications which are relevant in your space, and you will do the magic. So thanks Mr. Sengupta. And he finally made a point that poles will remain, North Pole and South Pole will exist. You don't become a part of it. You be opportunistic. Wherever the world tilts, you keep supplying to both the poles. That's essentially is the message from Mr. Sengupta. Thanks so much for it. Next question to Mr. Wilson is the real opportunities. And after, so this will be the final set of questions. After this, I would invite the questions straight from the grassroots, from the ground level, ground zero. So viewers who are watching us on YouTube live, you can post your questions. You can post your questions and we will pick them up. So please feel free, because you don't get a panel like Mr. Sengupta and Mr. Wilson very frequently. So please post your questions, feel free. We'll try and answer all of them. So next question is to Mr. Wilson, is real opportunity which you see? So which country, which sector, which industry, and how to go about it? The solution.
Well, if only I could answer that absolutely indirectly.
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot, but I would love to.
So clearly we're going to see demand in advanced economies skyrocketing. And I think the point was already made very well by Mr. Sengupta earlier, that in some sectors we're seeing shortages, which could be for some producers tremendous business opportunities. And we're seeing, in fact, shortages of supply in Europe and the US in many different sectors and many different industries. So that would seem to us as an opportunity, a new market opportunity for many businesses who may not have exported previously. The other area is, and I'm sorry, this actually repeats what you were just discussing with Mr. Sengupta, is around sustainability. And I really want to emphasize the importance of this agenda as a key business driver or as a business differentiator going forward. We're seeing the European Union move in a very ambitious direction when it comes to reducing climate emissions with its new Fit for 55 package and its Green New Deal. That may have implications around market access into Europe. But the bigger driver we're seeing in this, we start to see this agenda really take off, I would say, towards the back end of last year, is multinationals who have made big, very ambitious net zero climate commitments and now starting to look very seriously at the emissions footprint in their supply chain, bearing in mind that 60 to 70% of their emissions are ultimately what's known as Scope 3 emissions, so not within the company's direct control, but sat within the value chain somewhere. They're all starting to look very seriously about what do they do to solve this problem? How do they help SMEs decarbonize or improve their sustainability footprint? But also, how do they ultimately provide a preference for suppliers that are aligned with their global sustainability objectives? So I think any SME that can get ahead of that curve and very quickly show that it is sustainable or on the path towards net zero will find many, many opportunities within global value chains in the years to come. It's an important differentiator already. I think that importance will only grow in the years to come. And just to say, we have a number of tools that we offer. We have a program called the Chambers Climate Coalition, connecting local chambers of commerce that are able to provide support for SMEs looking to decarbonize their operations. We also have a program called the SME Climate Hub, together with the UN, which aims to provide free tools and resources for SMEs looking to enhance their sustainability footprint. So the tools are out there. There are costs involved, but hopefully capital will flow. But certainly in terms of access to global value chains, this is a very, very, very important differentiator that we shouldn't underestimate.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So very relevant point, opportunities which Mr. Wilson spoke about. So keep in mind, guys, what we spoke in the beginning is hyper demand. So think about it. Once the lockdown gets over, once the pandemic gets arrested, the whole bunch of people who have challenges with their mind, challenges with their well-being, they are going to step out. When they step out, they need better clothing. A lot of people for last 1.5, 2 years have not changed their wardrobe, including me, right? So everyone is going to get out and going to look best. So they are going to change their clothing, right? And at that point in time, if you give them sufficient, simple, cheaper solutions, even in the Western world, if you are able to figure out good sweaters, which may cost $150, $200, and you can make it for 100 or 150 rupees in India and export them. Bingo, you are there. Second thing which Mr. Wilson also spoke about is very interesting, is about the shortage of the equipment. When you are going out, you need a cycle, you need a bicycle, you need a scooter, you need a transportation, a less emission equipped vehicle. So it can be a tricycle, bicycle, anything. All those have got rusted because you may not have use for a longer period of time. So smaller equipments, if you're manufacturing, that can add a lot of value. So small items which you need to use when you get out, all of that will be in demand. So very important, but very small things, but very important things. And there will be, all of a sudden, everybody would want it, because the pandemic will get arrested immediately in a manner which is one go. It will not be step by step. So one country will get arrested with the pandemic once, and the whole population will go out. So it's not that first 10 people will go out, 20 people. So crores and people will start traveling. They would need, if they are going to traveling to a nation which is cold, they would need sweaters, jackets. If they are traveling to skiing, they would need that gear. So start working on it, because everybody is going to start traveling extensively as soon as this pandemic gets arrested, maybe in a few quarters time, or maybe in a couple of quarters time, right? So be prepared, because there is hyper demand which is going to come up, and this is the turnaround time for you SMEs. So keep that in mind. And if you are at the same time ESG compliant, Sone pe suhaga, as we call it in Hindi. So which means it will be a double benefit for you. People will prefer you, people will love you, people would want to engage with you to do business. So thanks, Mr. Wilson, for this fantastic insights. We will start with a Q&A immediately after this. Mr. Sen Gupta, last and final question from my end, and then we will hear from the audience. So I'm asking from a very generic perspective, 3 things which you should tell SMEs should be doing right now. So give me a theory book answer, but tell me, because our people are experts in execution, you tell us 3 theoretical things which SMEs and MSMEs should be doing at this juncture in July, end of July, so 28th July, what they should be doing for next 1 quarter to improve their business efficiency, to ensure that their business from SME, MSME becomes a listed entity.
Thank you. I mean, that's a very heavily loaded question. I mean, we do have to realize that, I mean, there are certain things that the MSME can do, but there is also an outside ecosystem in which the MSME work. So from the point of MSME, it's yes, what does global value chain work on? Global value chain basically works on fragmentation of the production, so that production takes place at its cheapest location. So you have to ensure that you are the most cost competitive player in town. So the top suppliers then come to you. For that, take help of digitization, take help of automation, increase the efficiency, improve the quality of your labor force. Yes, those are the things which an MSME can do, and individual firms. But just 2 minutes, I mean, there is something where one will also have to look at the broader ecosystem, because the capacity of the countries to enjoy the potential positive spillovers from GVCs will depend on the overall investment climate. It will depend on the quality of human capital, the infrastructure capacity. And there are gaps in developing countries across all of these. I mean, some countries have tried to resolve the infrastructure gap through special economic zones. There is mixed success rate of these. Some countries have been successful, some countries have not. So it's very important for the country, the public sector as a whole, to understand the infrastructure requirements of particular nodes of a specific value chain, if they aspire to enjoy the benefits from integrating into the global chain. And this is something that has to be done at a more macro context rather than at the firm level. Lastly, I mean, one should try to leverage on external both as well as in-house research. And what that basically means is that there is there's substantial research available, and this is from the theory. This is where I put my economist hat, the theory part. That there is, what are the key things that are needed to improve GVC participation? Trade liberalization, infrastructure, institutional quality, foreign direct investment. And not all of these are in the hands of the MSME. I mean, so there has to be a macro vision to improve the participation in global value chains.
So thanks. So very, very interestingly put, the first thing MSMEs should do is cost efficiency, cost efficiency, cost efficiency. Bring your cost down. Look at process by process. Wherever there is spillover, wherever there is excess, be ruthless in cutting your costs. Because if you are able to be the cheapest cost provider in the town, as Mr. Sen Gupta rightly put it, you will be the preferred one, because everybody ultimately is driven by money. So that's very, very simple. The second thing is research, which is specifically for the policy makers, which I'm sure they must be listening, or they may not be listening, but eventually they have to listen if they have to get the votes. So eventually they will listen. But what you can do is put this perspective in a different manner. Do the research about your customers. Understand what your customer wants. Understand how can you give client delight. And that can be done by getting the feedback from your clients. The research is also on your clients. So if you are able to have a good relation in terms of their feedback mechanism coming to you and you improvising, that itself will give you a lot of growth. Policy making is not in your hands, is not in my hands, is not in Rupa's hand, but clearly getting the feedback from the end customer whom you are supplying is in your hands. And if you keep doing it, closing the loop of the feedback, you can keep improvising year after year, month after month. So thank you, gentlemen. I will now jump to the questions. Oh, sorry, Rupa has few comments. Yes.
Yeah, there is a request from our media expert to Dr. Sen Gupta to please share a few of your slides because they want to see this.
Yes, please. Sorry.
If you don't mind.
Sure, 100%.
Thank you.
Sure. So let me. I have to share my screen, I presume.
Yeah, you have to share your screen.
Let me.
Anil, can you give the rights to Mr. Sen Gupta?
Yeah, it's already there.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah. So okay. So I was. So I mean, again, the presentation was basically. I'll just quickly run it in 5 minutes. The presentation was basically on how AIIB is partnering with India to accelerate inclusive and sustainable growth. So in terms of like economic progress, we all know this. Long-term GDP growth has been incrementally increasing. We have seen increasing per capita levels over the past several decades. A lot of this has been done through a structural transformation on the output side, with services becoming a dominant part, but not manufacturing. Manufacturing, we are still, as a percentage of GDP and percentage of employment, very, very low compared to other East and Southeast Asian economies. And so some of the things that we discussed today can help in bolstering this manufacturing. Poverty rates, again, India has done admirably well over the last 20 years. Millions of people have been brought out of poverty, but it's still a long way to go. India still is the home to one of the largest countries in terms of number of poor people. But COVID-19 has dented some of these gains. I mean, per capita, the contraction in the economy last year has meant basically that per capita GDP today is the same what it was 3 years back. Poverty rates are back to where they were in 2016. It was associated with a lot of unemployment spiking up both during the first and the second waves. And this has also dented our fiscal deficit. Our debt to GDP is back to where we were 20 years back. In terms of the challenges, what we find are some of the challenges include generating good jobs. Again, MSMEs are, as Mr. Rastogi rightly pointed out, biggest providers of jobs in our country, so we should make them more competitive. Currently, we see a lot of people working in jobs that are with very low productivity, agriculture, construction, and we need to translate them into more higher productivity jobs. Urbanization, India has been rapidly urbanizing, but urban infrastructure has been trailing. We do lag most of the Southeast Asian economies in terms of basic sanitation and other things. GVC participation, I think we have dealt extensively with this. India is a relatively small player, although the share has increased. GVC participation rate is quite low. There are only a few sectors where India is a major player. Improving the health outcome, again, the pandemic has shown us the importance of focusing on health and education sectors. This is what we were talking about. The shares of workers with informal training is one of the lowest in India compared to the other economies. And last, climate change. Again, we talked about this, that how it's very important to mitigate the impact of climate change. We are at South Asia region as a whole is very vulnerable. So I mean, being an infrastructure investment bank, we think that improving infrastructure is a major component of the policy toolkit. There will obviously be lot of other reforms that are needed, but to overcome these challenges, to improve your competitiveness, plug the deficiency in urban infrastructure, improve participation in GVCs, and counter the climate change channel. So again, these are all from secondary data. There is a lot of information on what is the annual infrastructure need in India, and they run from about 170 billion per year to about 313 billion, according to different estimates. But infrastructure investment has dropped in recent years, largely due to the sluggish investment by the private sector. So this is the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which came out early last year. It is a dynamic pipeline. It outlines the projects that have to be invested through a bottom-up approach. It also outlines several institutional reforms that are needed. So given this importance of infrastructure investment, AIB has a strong partnership with India. Overall, I think I need to just look at my notes. Globally, AIB has approved about 134 projects amounting to 26.5 billion. India, close to USD 6 billion, is the largest destination for AIB projects. These projects are across diverse sectors: transport, energy, urban, public health, and economic resilience. The last two we only started last year in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. They are geographically spread across many states. So this is the crisis recovery facility that came out in April 2020, when we realized the needs of our members, which were not immediate infrastructure investment, but something else to counter the pandemic. So the CRF has a total fund size is about $13 billion for 2 years, from April 20 to 22. And it will offer financing to both private and public sector who face serious adverse implications from COVID-19. They are across three sectors which were not traditionally infrastructure. So health sector needs, economic resilience, and address liquidity constraint. So far, AIIB has approved over $8.8 billion to India. $8.8 billion through CRF to 21 members, of which 1.25 billion under two projects to India, with another one being under discussion. So we are partnering with our other MDBs on this. As you can see, that for the India projects, we are partnered with both World Bank and ADB to provide these projects to India when there was a need to diversify out of traditional physical infrastructure. So that was my brief presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sengupta. This was very interesting presentation, very crisp, very focused. It actually gave us a perspective of what lies ahead of us, what mountain we need to climb from here, which we have got a little bit downhill. So
Sure.
Thanks. So first question comes from the audience, is on the logistics cost. So a gentleman, Ajay Ruya, he's saying that how to reduce the logistics cost, because that is adversely impacting the global trade finance. So Mr. Sengupta, you want to take this, or Mr. Wilson, whosoever?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, completely agree. I mean, if you're talking from the Indian perspective, yes, logistic cost is a major part of the cost competitiveness. And there are several studies which show that the time and money it takes to transport goods from hinterland to the port is significantly higher in India compared to some of the other East and Southeast Asian economies. This could be because of the quality of the road infrastructure, or the quality or the custom clearance required at the ports. And India has made some progress in the last years in trading across border of the World Bank's ease of doing business. So again, the way would be to improve the quality of infrastructure. I mean, one should have, I don't know, like freight corridors, which should ensure smooth transportation of goods from hinterland. Another way would be to develop, again, the entire ecosystem to see that if this is something that is not possible, what are the incentives that you can give to companies to, I know this is probably not very practical for existing companies, but what can you give to the companies to relocate to somewhere close to the port? So I think we have to take a dual approach for existing companies, improve the ease of transporting their goods to and from the port, because if you're a part of the value chain, you will need to import as well as export. So the cost actually doubles. And for newer companies, see if there are some policy incentives that can be offered.
So in fact, the government of India has reduced just before the pandemic started the corporate tax rates from 30% to 25%, and for the newer companies as low as 18%. So I think a lot of people can get benefited out of it. Second is now with the construction of Delhi Mumbai corridor, which is going to be a large stretch, and which should get implemented in next, or should get built in next 3 to 4 years. That should give a massive push to the corridor which you are talking about. Now, how should you integrate it with the port? That's the question which I think the government and the policymakers are still to figure out. So thanks so much. Next question is to Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson, there's a gentleman who wishes to start some business in the agro food processing space, and he has limited capital. So what is it that he can start with, and which is the ideal? And he's based out of India. So what is it that he can look at? He can look at to start the business and ensure that he becomes profitable sooner than later. So any thoughts?
I'll do my best. So I think one thing that is often untapped are intergovernmental support schemes from major public institutions. So the World Food Programme, IFAD, many development banks have specific lending lines or capital lines for SMEs, particularly any SMEs looking to establish a business with a clear sustainability footprint. So perhaps look at some of the international support schemes that are available, but often grossly underutilized. The second thing, I think, to go back to what we discussed earlier, is really think about if capital or access to debt finance is a vital component, really think about how do you make the business extremely bankable from a financial markets perspective. So digitization is clearly one very important element of that, and anything that can speed your onboarding, increase the surety that a bank would have in your business, can only be a good thing in that regard.
Interesting. So what Mr. Wilson is saying, that you should focus on the international schemes related to the food processing, to the agro food industry, which will enable you to get the benefits, not only get the market, but get the subsidy and the benefits as well. So focus on those areas. If you're agnostic, if you're indifferent towards one product versus other, it's better that you take with those schemes, because your costs of production, your end output cost will reduce because of these subsidies, and you'll be able to make money and become profitable at a PAT level much quickly. So thanks Mr. Wilson for that. Next question to Mr. Sen Gupta is, how important is R&D in terms of MSMEs? And since MSMEs are going through tougher times, do you think research and development should get reduced specifically today? What's your thought process on that?
Okay. So my sense would be that the importance of R&D would be different across different sectors. So some of the more innovative sectors, or sectors where innovations are happening at a more rapid pace, one would need R&D to remain at the top of the game. And again, this would again be linking it back to the global value chains. To remain cost competitive, which is the key premise of global value chains, you have to be investing in R&D. But at the same time, given this financial pressure, I think one should ensure that there is no duplication. So if there is an existing research or existing product which has been shown to be successful, one need not focus a lot of resources on that. And second, one of the benefits of the global value chain is sometimes the lead firms actually brings with itself the R&D. So that can be a good opportunity for MSMEs and tier 1, tier 2 suppliers to benefit on the R&D front.
So basically collaborate with the parent company, collaborate with a larger end product manufacturer, so that he himself can bring the technology, and you reduce those expensive dollars on the R&D. So very interesting perspective. Next question comes from the fact that there is inflation. So again, to Mr. Sengupta, there is there are murmurs, or in fact some of the countries are actually witnessing hyperinflation as well because of excessive supply of money, printing of currency, stimulus, whatever word you want to use. At the same time, if you increase the interest rates, the growth will get compromised. So where's the balance, and what's the future of inflation?
Yes, I mean, this is a very important question from the macro perspective. So I think currently the spike in inflation we are seeing, and this is true even across commodity prices, if you see they have gone up, is happening because of a couple of factors. One is, of course, the easy liquidity that has been pumped in the economy. The second is the pent-up demand, or the pent-up capacity that was left unutilized, which is happening. And lastly, it is on the consumer side, the fact that with restrictions being eased, there is demand for more goods and services. So we need to differentiate these out. The supply side disruptions, one can hope that with vaccination, with the pandemic tapering down, those will be resolved, and that effect would ameliorate over the medium term. On the other two sides, like the pent-up demand, and as economies recover, there would be a demand side pressure. So there might be murmurs of some country cutting back on the stimulus. Now that will definitely have an impact. I mean, it will have an impact on countries who are benefiting from this low interest rate. For countries like South Asia, where the interest rates are now low, but again, for example, in India, the RBI right now has to balance between stimulating growth and reducing inflation. The inflation is already outside the inflation targeting band. So this would be a tough call for the policymakers. But again, one would think that once these disruptions have leveled out, one would find inflation coming back to its steady level, what we had witnessed between 2014 to 19, which was a relatively moderate inflation period.
Understood. So what you are essentially saying, that this is temporary, this is only for a specific period, it's situational, and that is largely driven by the pent-up demand, and that's why everything is gonna cool down maybe in a couple of quarters time. Rupa, you have a question? You are on mute, Rupa.
Yes. From the research asking us what are AIIB's investment target in clean energy for India? Do you have any specific investment target that you have for India, and also for Mr. Wilson, since ICC represents over 45 million business houses, how do you think you can help India, particularly our MSMEs, to reach out to this huge industry base that you have with you? Can we kind of work on something like this, because most of our exporters are today not being able to find the markets that they're looking for, and it's very difficult for them to reach out. So is there any way that we could connect with them? These are the two questions I have for both of you.
Mr. Sengupta, you want to talk about the clean energy first?
Sure. So we don't, again, I am not an expert in this. I might have to ask some of my colleagues for a more definite answer. But I just did a quick check on our website while you were asking this question. I don't think we have a country-specific targets for every country, but we have a target for our overall portfolio. And what we have is that 50% of our finance will be climate finance by 2025. This is a part of our corporate strategy that came out last year.
Sure. And what is the total number by 2025, if I have to ask?
Yeah, this is again something I might have to come back to you. I'm not sure.
I was just trying to put the numbers of 25%. That's
yeah. Because as we mentioned that the idea of AIB is to be flexible to its members' needs. So because of the pandemic over the last year and a half, we have significantly ramped up our investment. So the quantum of our investment also depends on what is the need of our members.
Understood. Got it. So we have to make little more noise, Rupa, via you and via the World Trade Center to get further allocation. Yes, Mr.
Mr. Sengupta, I had attended the launch of AIB at Delhi and your conference in Mumbai.
Right, sir.
I was a delegate, so I participated in 2 days, which Prime Minister inaugurated.
Yes, absolutely.
In Mumbai. And there was no separate allocation like for MSME, which I recollect, because of course there were a lot of discussion on infrastructure, a lot of discussion on funding, but I think there was no such separate classification on MSME, which needs to be done. If not, you can make a suggestion on our behalf, because that will go a long way. Because today, all said and done, large industries can survive. There are various areas of borrowing, whereas MSME does not have various areas to borrow money. They have banks or institutions, because the stock exchange, various other FDIs, other type of funds you don't get. And one more thing, the big scope for digitization is one more reason that China doesn't want to go for digitization. They want to invest in the companies which are going for digitization. Because after Alibaba episode, Jack Ma, everybody knows, I don't want to talk it in public. They don't want to openly say that collect data and everything in China, because they feel that their data will be leaked and they don't want to share data with anyone. That's why if you could see Paytm, Zomato, who is the biggest investor? China. Even in the IPO,
right,
it's China. It's IPO, of course, they are funded through an American company, and which is Chinese, holded by China. It may be only American name. I know, means all these are in few, it may be in few domains, but it is a fact. So what I feel, one is MSME, and of course, and Indians are very good IT experts. So that is one area where there's a lot of opportunity. And you had mentioned that during your observations on digitization is the future. And our Prime Minister has been also talking about digital economy. And fortunately, some digital economy was there, so you were able to survive the pandemic. Because, of course, only digitization is not answer to all problems. That also is true. So what I feel is, and I feel if you, as you say, World Economic Order, if you go by the New World Order book, it starts from 2003, how these all pandemics have come and happened and all. That book reveals everything. What we are talking today, it is all there. So that all could be part of everybody's public domain. Of course, that books have been banned, but some people are having it and you can read about it. So how it started from SARS, swine flu and all. So all this, but way forward is that we look at better opportunities, work better in a way, and also create more immunity and a system is such natural calamity you have to live with. You can call it natural, you can get man-made, you can call it virus, whatever you call it by name. Thank you. Sorry, I just...
No, thanks, Mr. Kalantri. So next question is to Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson, the connections and the reach of international chambers of commerce and Indian SMEs. How can we collaborate and make 1 + 1 = 11?
Great question. So Rupa, we thank you for the question, and we'd love to explore potential collaboration to see how we can practically help small businesses in India. And actually, one thing we've been placing a lot more focus on in recent months through the crisis is how do we use our network to provide practical support rather than just global advocacy and international standards? What can we actually do to channel practical support? So we have, for instance, a new program called Trade Now, which is focused on enabling SME access to trade finance.
Sorry, Andrew, can you repeat that? The trade finance is there a website? Was it what it is?
It's a program called Trade Now, NOW, which is essentially a platform that we've established. It's essentially an app store for different fintech and innovative trade finance providers. We've also established a number of centers for entrepreneurship to enable capacity building for entrepreneurs and SMEs. And then the other thing that could be particularly useful is work we're doing together with the International Trade Center to look at how to support SMEs navigate increasingly complex international trade requirements through a trade help desk program. So those are just a few highlights of what we're currently working on, but we'd be very keen to explore potential areas of cooperation going forward.
Sure. Next question is again from Ms. Rupa. Yes, please.
I'm very happy to inform Wilson and also Sen Gupta that World Trade Center Mumbai has developed an online platform called the WeTrade. This platform can showcase SMEs to all the ICC members. And if we can collaborate with ICC, I would like to invite not just Indian, but I'd like to invite SMEs from across all the World Trade Centers to participate on this WeTrade platform. We can showcase the products and services provided by these SMEs, even micro units. It will give us a great mileage to reach out to ICC members. It's up to them if they want to then do business with them. But this is a platform through which we can reach out. It's an online platform. It works in all languages. So far, we've had about 5 to 6 exhibitions where we have exhibited Indian companies and even international companies, but we've never had a reach up to ICC. And today I've got this connect with you, and I don't want to lose this. So I want to make best use of this today. And I want to reach out to you. I will write to you very shortly, and I'll seek this cooperation and collaboration and support from ICC. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
So Trade Now plus Trade Now plus WeTrade. Yeah.
WeTrade. It's called WeTrade. It's an online platform.
Correct. Yes, Mr. Sen Gupta.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Rastogi. I mean, just if I could just respond to something Mr. Kalantri said, which was very, very important about AI-based collaboration with MSMEs. I think we do realize that MSMEs form the backbone for most economies, especially in the emerging economy. So the idea for funneling money into investment, infrastructure investment, was that we realized that MSMEs are probably disproportionately impacted by bad infrastructure. The large companies, they can have resources to have their own captive gensets, private access roads, which the MSMEs can't. So it's important to build infrastructure for the MSMEs. And secondly, I mean, trying to be flexible and responding to the needs, which I've said, our COVID-19 response facility actually had a component which was to provide money through financial institutions for supporting MSMEs for their working capital need, for buying the inputs, etc. So I was just doing a quick search on my website, and the details are already available on our website. So we have provided these kind of loans to a number of countries in a wide range of regions: Rwanda, Turkey, Georgia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, so Uzbekistan, Vietnam. So we do realize the importance of SMEs in most emerging economies.
Interesting. So guys, what you need to do is go and search on the AIIB website. You can search on eTrade. You can search on Trade Now. These are the 3 go-to apps. You will see at least few key points. So let me share it. I'll share it on the chat box. Mr. Sen Gupta, your website is www.aiib.org. .org. Mr. Wilson, the Trade Now website, the app would be what it will.
So the best place to access it is via our corporate website, which is www.iccwbo.org.
iccwbo.org, right? Perfect.
Exactly.
And Rupa, for eTrade, the source website would be?
It's a WeTrade.
WeTrade.
TRAD.org.
WeTrade.
Yeah, WeTrade. WeTrade.org.
Okay. So guys, use these 3 websites and you will get benefit out of it. Last question for the day, and then we will wrap up all the session. The last question to Mr. Sen Gupta is on the government government of India's role. Is it too less? Is it too high? I know it's a controversial one. It's a loaded one. You you may want to take a middle path. Uh, your thing that is it good enough? It should have been better. And when do you think the RBI is gonna take the hit on the growth and increase the interest rates? So these two.
Yeah, again, very controversial questions, and frankly, I don't know if I have enough knowledge to respond these questions. But we do see a proactive stance. I mean, from the government of India. I mean, just going by global numbers, if we look at the jump in our rankings on ease of doing business, if you look at the quantum of foreign direct investment that has come in, so using these measures, and as we mentioned, that these are very important for global value chains. I mean, it does seem that India is moving at in the right direction. If it is moving at the right pace or not, that depends. But it's definitely moving in the right direction. The balance between growth and inflation rate, it's again very difficult to judge. I mean, the COVID-19 shock was like one in a century. Like Sir pointed out or you pointed out actually, sorry, Mr. Rastogi, the last time this happened was in 1918. So these are unprecedented times. When we had designed the inflation targeting framework, one didn't think of it. So, I mean, it's definitely the requirement is to boost economic growth, because that has real implications on unemployment, on poverty rate. So, but one will have to see when RBI takes a call on the interest rate.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much for this answer, and thank you for so much for spending time with us, giving the audience, giving the entire wisdom which was expected. So wonderful, 1 hour 45 minutes discussion. Thank you for your kind company, august company, and thank you for thinking about India, thinking about India's growth. We shall all collaborate, and soon, maybe in a decade's time, India will be the growth engine of the world. So thank you guys. Keep staying healthy and get vaccinated, because world needs you. World needs you to open up. World needs you to do business. World needs your services. So stay healthy, stay fit, and stay optimistic.
Thank
Jai
you.
Hind.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Mr. Sengupta, just two quick questions that would like to ask. The first one is in your slide, you have given that the AIIB is proposing 500 million investment in India for creating a coordinated and responsive Indian social protection system. So can you quickly elaborate, please?
I think actually the information should be on our website. So if you look at, so I'm just trying to see, just give me a sec. Yes. So, I mean, you have to filter it out. So, I mean, I can maybe...
It's there. I can see.
So,
why don't you just put the link on the chat box?
Okay, let me do that.
Yeah, thank you. And the second one is in the light of IMF slashing India's economic growth forecast to 9.5%. What is your view and approach that the Indian government should opt for to arrest the decline?
Okay, as I answer the questions, I hope you do realize that these are my personal views and not the view of my organization. So I think, I mean, we do realize that the IMF has slashed, I wouldn't call it slash, has reduced the growth from 12.5 to 9.5. Part of this, I think, reflects the base effect, because if you see, the last year's contraction has also been reduced from 8% to 7.3%. So there is that statistical anomaly that if the economy contracted less last year, it will grow less this year because of the base effect. But the second point is, we did see early this year the second wave, which did result in localized lockdowns. So that might have an impact. So, having said that, so I think 9.5% still makes India one of the fastest growing large economies in the world. I know it's coming on the back of a contractionary year. So, but to tackle some of the development challenges that I mentioned, and this is again with the government's idea of making India a $10 trillion economy within the next few years, we will have to persist with higher growth rates over a sustained period of time and ensure that the growth is inclusive and sustainable.
Yeah, thank you so much, and my apologies for asking these two questions. And as we have come to the end of the session, may I request Captain Somesh Batra, the Vice Chairman of World Trade Center Mumbai, to kindly propose the vote of thanks.
Good morning, good afternoon. What a pleasure to listen to all the gurus of the industry, Mr. Rastogi and Andrew Wilson, as well as Mr. Sengupta. I am neither an economist, nor in the capital market, nor in the policy making. I am on the other side of the fence. I am in logistics and shipping business, and we have got even today problems through our ears, our nose, and head is going around, all confusion for various supply chain disruptions. We started with the Vijay's session saying that exports need to be enhanced, supply chain disruptions need to change or have to be improved, capacity building, restrictions to be removed by the countries, pharma, textile, farm products are some of the areas that India needs to pay attention to. From other panelists, there have been various areas that they have come about. Mr. Wilson said that he's from Yorkshire, he is gone, but I wanted to ask him, in addition to Yorkshire putting, what else does that place bring? But nevertheless, he's came back with some very, very nice points. There is also, he said, low visibility, which is a fact. The information, it is an information age, but information not necessarily goes to the every element, and the feedback also is limited. There is a stimulus at various places. Also, the point was made that generally MSMEs are pessimistic. I would like to pose a simple question. Is it pessimistic or they are risk averse? They are risk averse because their sources of finance are limited, and their also horizon is limited because of information flow that is not necessarily there. There is intense competition there. There are opportunities in various sectors, as was told by the various analysts, and those are to be really taken advantage by some of our people in India as well as in the world. Some of the credit guarantees, challenges, guidance, disruptions, opportunities, banks, funding, also advanced economies. It has been one of the basic reasons in supply chain has been that advanced economies have all of a sudden woken up to work from home, working different, and their order book for various infrastructure development has grown out of proportion. Today, this has disrupted the entire supply chain in the Far East. There are berthing delays for the ships in Shanghai, in Yantian, in Singapore, in Colombo, every port which is there, including European ports, the ships are waiting for days, not able to get berths, and there is many times not much reverse cargo. So where are the ships moving? The ships are moving where there is a maximum revenue to be made, because earlier years there were lots of losses that they incurred. So this is, to my mind, not going away in a hurry. The containers, I also am a partner with the largest container lessor in the world, Triton from New York. There is tremendous demand for containers all over the world. but the containers at the wrong place at the wrong time. You need it here, they are sitting in the US. You need it in China, they are sitting in somewhere else, and they have been in empty reposition all over. We're running 99% utilization. What do? Prices have gone up double in China. What was 1 year ago, $2,000, now they're quoting $4,000 one day. So these things will have to rebalance. They will have to change time. And also, you had mentioned if we are heading in the right direction, I am sure it may be a journey of 1,000 miles, but we will eventually reach that goal. And with that, I thank all the panelists. I thank Rupa and my colleague Vijay to bring this together. Also, all the team behind us and all our partners who are listening to us. There are areas that you brought in, which are very, very important areas. Those are the areas we will all look at. Health infrastructure needs change, poverty line having enhanced, and also a point was made that the bill of ladings 99.9% probably are still paper. But where is the internet connectivity when you go inland? There is none. In our company here, everything that we are issuing is all digital. However, when you go 100 kilometers from here, 200 kilometers there, it doesn't exist. They can't get internet. They have to wait for 6 hours, 9 hours, and so on and so forth. Those changes are coming. Skill development has to be made, and those will take time. But at the moment, I think our government is trying hard. Persons like you are bringing it. The banking sector, the infrastructure development sector are all working together, and sometimes they need to put it all in perspective for everybody to understand. With that, I thank everybody for putting their best foot forward and also giving us, as I said, a lot of gyan. We've learned a lot and educated, and we will continue to work together with you, both ICC, Infrastructure Development Bank, and also Mr. Rastogi. We will probably count on you to come back again to us and give us some more gyan on the years to come or days to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Batra. Thank you. Jai Hind. Thank you.